Good morning, Michael Wander here with Wander CPA. Going to talk about the CPA services, specifically accounting and auditing. So here we go. Let's find out how this is going to work. There's buttons. There we go. Types of CPA services. Put my face right here. So we have accounting and auditing services. Beep, beep, beep. See it? Teeter. Then business and management consulting services, financial services, and tax services. We are going to discuss, boom, accounting and auditing services. Love those features. So, pulse. Okay, here we go. Accounting and auditing services, they include both attest services as well as non-attest services. Attest is going to include assurance, right? Kind of get a technical, these terminologies over here. Attest is going to include assurance and non-assurance. What do you know? Now, assurance is going to include audit, exams, and a review services, right? Those are the various types of assurance services that we're going to look at right now. So attest, audit, right? An audit, what is an audit? An audit is when you provide the client, you provide a company with some sort of assurance that their financial statements are in accordance with some applicable financial reporting framework, GAAP, etc., IFRS. And the level of assurance is important. The level of assurance is reasonable, right? Quote, reasonable. We don't provide absolute assurance. It's just reasonable assurance that they are not materially misstated. All this terminology is very important when it's put inside the report, right? So we're not guaranteeing that the financial statements are accurate. We're providing reasonable assurance through audit procedures. So we look at the financial statements specifically during an audit, and different types of procedures include inquiry. You ask them a question, you're physically observing it, physically inspecting what's going on, you're observing silently in the background, and you're confirming with third parties. There's many different ways, different procedures that are used. And lastly, what's the reason that a company might need an audit to be performed? It's perhaps a bank wants to give them a loan and says, hey, I need audited financial statements. Perhaps somebody is looking at purchasing, right? Doing a merger and acquisition. They want to know, they want assurance, they want assurance that the business is not materially misstated, right? If I'm going to be buying a business and it says it has $1 million in assets, I want assurance that that $1 million is real, that they really have those assets, they really have the properties they're talking about, that they really have the equipment, etc., and that they're really making a certain amount of revenue per year, right? So rather than the purchaser going in and looking at all the documents and not having that necessarily having that skill or that knowledge about that industry or about the company or just even how to go about searching for it, because it can get very intricate and complicated, so they hire an auditor. Now, secondly, an examination is also assurance. Now, what's the difference between an examination and an audit? It's not the level of assurance, because they both have reasonable assurance. So what's the difference? The difference is that an examination is for non-historical financial statements. For example, if a company needs to have its greenhouse gases looked at and needs a report on it to say exactly how much the greenhouse gases were for whatever reason, for the regulators, for example, then they would hire an auditor to come and perform an examination service. Now, a quick word about an auditor and how it relates to a CPA. So the CPA has two general licenses. This is inside the United States. I'm not sure how it works in other countries. I might look into it, but in the United States, there are two types of licenses. Everybody who passes the CPA exam gets the general license. If somebody wants to become an auditor or have the ability to perform attest services, then they have to go through an additional level of experience. They have to work under an auditor. They have to get a certain minimum number of hours. So, and you can see that on the state CPA website. You can look up every CPA, you can look up their name and make sure that they are still licensed, actively licensed, and you can also see what type of license they had, if they have an ability to perform attest services and to sign an audit report. So that is briefly about the difference about how a CPA and attest services work together. So that is an exam. We looked at an audit and we looked at an exam. Now we're going to look briefly at what a review is. A review is also an assurance type of service. Now the difference between a review and an audit is that there's only limited assurance provided. So the degree of digging that an auditor would perform when a CPA would perform when doing a review versus doing an audit will be a lot more toned down. So generally it's a lot less expensive because they don't have to do as much work, and it doesn't provide as much assurance. It's limited assurance. So and also a review can be done on either historical financial statements, right, regular financial statements, or non-historical financial statements, such as an examination, for example. So that is a review. And just, what did I want to say? That's pretty much it. If I think about it, I'll come back. So we looked at what an attest is, right? We looked at the assurance portion of an attest, an audit, an exam, and a review. Now we are looking at the non-assurance portion of a test, and we're also going to be looking at the non-attest, right? So non-assurance portion of a test and non-attest in the same slide coming up next. Under non-assurance, we have what's called agreed upon procedures. Agreed upon procedures, we're going to go into it briefly. And finally, we have a non-assurance, but yes, attest compilation. So and then under non-attest, we have financial statement preparation. Briefly, going to go over those three items in the next slide. Non-assurance and non-attest services, right? Non-assurance and non-attest services. Under non-assurance services, we have what's called agreed upon procedures. Agreed upon procedures, for example, what is an agreed upon procedure? Really, it could be a lot of things, right? It's basically you just agree. The CPA agrees with the client upon some procedure to be done. The client, the business owner calls upon the CPA and says, hey, I need you, given the experience you have with audits, with a test, I want you to perform such a procedure. And so they agree upon it. And so there's an official word for it called an agreed upon procedure. They agree upon that procedure. So for as an example, as I just mentioned, if the business mergers and acquisitions, right? So the client, if they're looking at a business to purchase, right, looking at the M&A industry, then they might want specific services. Perhaps they want the CPA to look at one of the GL items, right, one line item. Just look at the cash. Look at the cash in the bank. Make sure that all the different accounts, make sure that their cash account is accurate. And that might be fairly simple. However, if they want to ensure that the client is reporting correctly at a certain date, then it might not be as simple because you have to look at the cash at a certain date, and you might have to, there may have been cash moving around. So it's not as simple as it sounds. However, there could be a lot more complicated ones than just looking at the cash. So that is an agreed upon procedure. So again, no assurance. It's not assurance, but it is a test, right? So you still are attesting to the accuracy, and you do issue a report with an AUP, agreed upon procedure. Now, with regards to the compilation, is a test service and not an assurance. But it's not assurance, it is a test. And what compilation is, the CPA assists the client in presenting their financial statements. So the information is the client's. The client has prepared it, or the client has prepared it, yes. The client has brought the information together. The client knows the information. The CPA is merely helping the client to put it together in an accurate way, or in accordance to some sort of financial framework, or the client is actually putting it together according to that framework. Now, the CPA has to ensure that it is free from obvious material misstatements, right? If something comes up, the CPA has to look at it critically and say, hey, I'm looking at this, something doesn't make sense over here, right? So that is the benefit, the value of the compilation services, is that the bank or whoever is requesting, I'm actually working on a compilation right now. So whoever is requesting the compilation services, they have some sort of attestation from the CPA that it is free from obvious material misstatements. I keep looking over there because that's where it's written, free from obvious material misstatements. Again, the wording is very particular and the wording is very important. Now, a report also is issued with that. Now, CPA does not need to be independent for compilation services. However, they must declare if they are independent or not in the report. So that is a significant difference between that and the previous services that we were looking at that were assurance services. Last but not least, we're going to look at non-attest services. Simply, it is the preparation of financial statements, right? So a client comes to me and says, hey, can you please prepare my financial statements? Absolutely, no problem. I'll prepare the financial statements. And that is not an attest service. I am not attesting to the accuracy of any sort and not necessarily issuing a report, right? That's not what I am being engaged for. So, like I said, no independence is required for that as well. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but that is the case. So, in closing, we looked at accounting and audit services, one of the many types of services that a CPA can provide. And that includes both attest and non-attest services. Under attest, we have assurance and non-assurance. Under assurance, we have an audit, an exam, and a review. Under non-assurance, we have the AUPs and we have a compilation. And then the non-attest looks at preparing financial statements. Okay, hope that was a mouthful. That was a lot of stuff. And then just back out. You zoom in, you start big, you zoom into the detail, and now we're back and back out. Back and back out. We look at the types of CPA services. We have accounting and auditing services that we looked at. That is what we looked at today. Next time, we might look at the business and management consulting services. How does a CPA perform? What are the specifics about business and management consulting services? And then financial services. What does that include? And lastly, tax services, what everybody loves. Taxes. Everybody loves taxes. We don't love to pay them, but we love taxes because we love to save money on taxes. And that is the conclusion. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. My face right here in the middle of the city. Thank you for joining us. And yes, that's my information down there, right? Wander is my last name. info@wandercpa.com. You can send an email over there and you can reach me find us at www.wandercpa.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.